100 days into Trump's second presidency, what is the state of the political opposition to Trump? Coming up, an UpFront special. Joining me to discuss the response to Trump's first 100 days are Briahna Joy Gray, a lawyer and political commentator and former National Press Secretary for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. We also have Kate deGruyter, Senior Director of Communications at the public policy think tank Third Way. And of course, Tim Shenk, Assistant Professor of History at George Washington University and author of the book Left Adrift: What Happened to Liberal Politics. I'm just going to start with you then, Tim. Since Trump took office in January, he has consolidated his power, expanded his executive power, and I can't keep up with the executive orders that he signed. It's around 130, right? Overhauling the federal government, upending U.S. foreign policy, and of course the economic turmoil that we are seeing as a result of these tariffs. How do you view Trump's 100 days in office, and particularly this rapid onslaught of the American political system?
Well, it certainly has been a shock and awe presidency so far. And I think the saying goes that the journey of 1,000 miles begins by shooting yourself in the foot, which certainly is what the administration has done with Liberation Day, right? President Trump was elected more or less to be president of the grocery store, and deciding as his first sort of flagship initiative to more or less hike prices across the board has to be one of the single biggest self-owns in American political history. That, combined with overreach on areas where the public is on his side, from my opinion, unfortunately, like immigration, along with these weird side quests into taking over Greenland or rewriting Harvard's curriculum, plus a sort of consistent through line of incompetency across the board, which isn't necessarily fatal, but certainly doesn't help. All of this means that Trump now has, in my opinion, blown what was probably his single best opportunity to turn a protest vote against Joe Biden into something like a durable new Republican majority. Now, there's plenty of time to course correct, but my headline from the first 100 days is more or less missed opportunity.
Of course, the impact is not just domestic, it's reverberating across the world. Kate, let me ask you this. What has been the impact of these measures on America's standing globally and on American democracy itself?
I think what we've seen is that the Trump's 100 days of chaos that we've seen play out have been eroding relationships and credibility for the United States around the world that have been built over decades. This is a really important moment where we are seeing that the Trump administration has no respect for the rule of law. They are shredding relationships that are vital in keeping peace and putting a check on foreign powers like Russia. And China is going to take notice. So this is a very dangerous moment for America. And what's worse, I think what we are seeing is that there is a huge reset on the globe. And we are very concerned about the way that these relationships being shredded will have reverberations for years to come. And I think there's a real danger that the world order that is being upended has a lot of unintended consequences that hurt America for years to come.
Briahna, come in here. You know, depending on who you speak to, people often say, why are we surprised? He said he would do the things that he is doing. But if you speak to his supporters, even in the GOP, they'll say it's just rhetoric, it's just words, he doesn't mean it. So your reaction to the first 100 days, but also should we be surprised at what is unfolding?
Yeah, I have to confess that I've had both of those instincts at various points during these first 100 days. I mean, if you talk to a lot of, people within the Democratic Party, that will say, well, we warned you. Kamala Harris warned you. We knew this was going to happen. We very much advertised the reality of Project 2025. And I do think, while I have some real criticisms of Democratic Party messaging leading into the election, they did do a good job of sort of pointing to that particular document as a signpost of what was to come. That being said, it's also true that there has been sort of maximalist, alarmist language that has been used to describe Trump since he first came riding down that golden elevator escalator in 2015. And I do think for the average American, there's a bit of a boy who cried wolf situation, and they were willing to tune out a lot of the more maximalist fears of what would happen and anticipate that this was going to be pretty much like Trump's first term, which, while frustrating in certain respects, as a leftist, I certainly don't appreciate a huge tax cut for billionaires being the primary policy objective, but we certainly weren't seeing American citizens being deported, threatened with deportation, the kind of anti-speech influence on college campuses and the like. And I think the third prong that makes this a sort of unmoored moment is that some of the points that Kate was talking about were presaged by the Democratic Party. So the kind of multipolar world that, yes, Trump is welcoming in with open arms by destabilizing the economy and being such a bull in a china shop had started long before the Trump presidency. And the disrespect for international law, you have to include what happened to our global standing because of our unwillingness to follow international law with respect to Gaza. And that also played into the losses the Democrats suffered last fall in a way that we cannot ignore.
Okay, we're going to expand on Gaza in just a moment, but let's just stick to what Trump is doing, bypassing Congress, ignoring court orders in order to overhaul the federal government, Kate, firing thousands of federal workers, gutting long-standing agencies like USAID, the Department of Education, and the Social Security Administration. In comes the Department of Government Efficiency, led by the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. This agency is behind much of this government overhaul. So the question is, what is the Democratic Party doing to counter and fight all of this?
Well, I think we do have to fight, and I think that's one area where Briahna and I probably agree. This is not a moment for Democrats to sit on their hands. This is a vital moment to stand up for the things that the American people care about. And Americans who saw chaos at the prices at the grocery store, but also on the border, they saw chaos and crime, some of which I believe was very much fed by a right-wing media ecosystem. But we have to recognize that voters, including Democratic voters, care about that. And what we've seen is that the president and Elon Musk are going after things that people actually do care about. They did not vote to fire air traffic controllers. They did not vote to eliminate nuclear safety experts who are protecting our arsenal and making sure that Americans in communities across this country are safe. There are a whole lot of things that this administration is doing in their reckless effort to take a literal chainsaw to the federal government that are harming people in a very direct way, and I think we're going to see that play out. So it is incumbent on Democrats to really draw those connections and to talk about how the chaos of these 100 days and the chaos that is clearly going to continue is going to be harming the safety and security of the American people in tangible ways that they care about.
So Tim, just sticking with this theme of how the Democrats must reorganize, how American society must respond to the significant political moment. We have seen, though, Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at rallies that have been successful. Thousands of people have been attending, and they've branded these rallies as Fight the Oligarchy. What is their end game here? Is it to draw more working class voters, even Trump voters who are disillusioned with what is happening right now? Is it to influence policy within the Democratic Party, or do they have their sight on bigger things? In other words, the 2028 primary.
I feel like the answer has to be all of the above. Now, maybe not for Briahna's old boss, Bernie Sanders. Much as I would love for him to be around forever, the actuarial tables tell me maybe not the best bet for a run in 2028, but certainly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has to be near the very top of potential candidates for that next election. And I think the sort of extraordinary popularity of this tour, the enthusiasm that's generated, has been, to me, one of the most heartening signs of the last 100 days. Something like a Tea Party for the left, something we've talked about for years and years and years, but it seems like that might really be here. And I think it really comes from the remarkable ability that Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez have to convey in clear and understandable and attention-grabbing ways the message that the economy is rigged and Washington is broken. They understand it. They are on your side. Now, there is a long way to go from there toward a winning presidential campaign, let alone a transformation of the Democratic Party or American politics. But I think it's the best start we've had in a good long time.
Okay, come on, Briahna, do you want to see your boss?
But maybe not.
I tell you, I would love for all of that to be true. I'm just very skeptical that the Democratic Party is going to get behind that kind of campaign. Why do I think so? Well, I just finished working on exactly that kind of campaign where, actuarial tables aside, Bernie Sanders was young enough to run back in 2020. And we saw the hostility that the Democratic Party met him with, even though he was enormously popular with the exact message that is galvanizing tens of thousands of people at these rallies in red states right now today. And what did the Democratic Party say in response to that, to this oligarchy message? Well, it's much the same as what they're saying today. They had commentators like MSNBC's Jason Johnson get on TV and argue with Bernie Sanders surrogate and Nina Turner, saying people don't understand oligarchy. Stop saying oligarchy. The only oligarchs run Russia. There's no oligarchs in America. Meanwhile, in that very same campaign, you have Michael Bloomberg, an oligarch, buying his way into an election, buying his way onto the debate stage by basically ginning up advertising numbers by big spends in relatively inexpensive states. And once he's on the stage, of course, the Democratic Party demands compliance. Would you accept this man as your nominee, even though it's a completely anti-democratic intervention onto the debate stage? And every other candidate stands there, even consumer advocates and leftists like Elizabeth Warren stands there and says, yes, this man who has been credibly accused of all kinds of misconduct, the architect of stop and frisk, a man who spoke at the Republican National Convention not so long ago, can be the head of our party. So I think what we're dealing with is that the Democratic Party, yes, it can see that Bernie and AOC are engendering all of this enthusiasm, and they're happy that someone is working up a fight against Republicans. But if you listen to what Democratic Party officials are actually saying about those protests, they say, I like that they're fighting. I like that there's a fight. I don't agree with their message. And they're very consistent about that. And I am very skeptical that they will do anything other than instrumentalize Bernie and AOC to sheep herd people back into the Democratic Party, where, of course, they will be presented probably with a billionaire oligarch like J.B. Pritzker or Gavin Newsom to top the ticket in 2028.
But then we are seeing, Kate, your thoughts here. We are seeing billionaires' influence in the White House. I mean, they're playing an overt and direct role, especially the tech billionaires as well. Is that something that the Democrats could rise and counter? I mean, could this even turn voters who supported Trump's populism to the left, to AOC, to Bernie Sanders? Or are you skeptical like Briahna is skeptical? She's saying no. What do you say?
Well, look, I think that there's a math problem. The Democratic Party has been able to win elections when we have a broad coalition, because frankly, there are not enough liberals in this country to run far to the left and win in the places that matter. And what we saw in this last election is that people who are high media consumers and that follow politics closely got more liberal, and the rest of the country, which vastly outnumbers it, moved to the right. So we have to grapple with that reality, and that wasn't just the white working class, which we spent a very long time talking about in 2016, but we saw erosion among key groups that have typically been considered part of the Democratic base, and they moved to the right. And so I think we have to really grapple with
like Latino
how that
voters.
Works.
Bernie Sanders won 70% of the Latino vote in Nevada, and the news media, after he did, said, oh, we have to wait for an actual diverse, I think it was Soledad O'Brien said, we have to wait for an actually diverse state to vote before we can decide what the non-white people in America actually want. Bernie Sanders was also the most popular candidate in that race with independent voters. So this kind of left-right dynamic, I think, really misses the fact that there's a top-down, insider-outsider, establishment, anti-establishment vein going through this country that has existed way back since 2016. And in the wake of Trump's win in that year, so many leftists tried to identify that to the Democratic Party and to the public, that the reason that Trump was appealing to so many folks is because he was anti-establishment. A lot of the things he said were lies, he didn't follow through, but talking about wanting to defund the FBI, to drain the swamp, to go against corruption. When he says, I'm a millionaire, I'm a billionaire, and I know how the system works and how people cheat, and I can ferret those flaws out for you, that was appealing to folks. And what the Democrats have to figure out now is how they're going to be able to occupy a lane as outsiders and insurgents when they're doing things like trying to kick DNC Vice Chair David Hogg out of the party for having the audacity to say he's going to have a PAC that fundraises for people who are challenging these old Democratic incumbents who won't get out of their seats.
So the Democrats are not getting their story right, as far as Briahna is concerned. And I mean, bringing it back to the now with everything at their disposal, overhauling the federal government, federal workers losing their job, the division and almost heated rhetoric and political engagements that are happening in the United States. It sounds as if these issues are far broader than the bread and butter issues of, the cost of groceries, unemployment, that kind of thing. Is the ideological impasse so severe that there's no way of finding some middle ground amongst the Democrats?
For the few million people who watch shows like this one and follow politics seriously, absolutely. For most Americans, though, and this is where I think Kate and Briahna and we all agree, most Americans are just tuned out. They are not consistent ideological thinkers. They have strong views, but those views don't map neatly onto a left-right binary, and they do often fit more with this insider-outsider dynamic, which is why you can have not just Bernie-Trump crossover in 2016, but Obama to Trump crossover. These are weird mishmash coalitions are a staple of American history, and not just American history, but global politics. And the question facing Democrats now is whether they can, a party that has increasingly become the party of the establishment, can figure out a way to get in touch with the populist discontent that's been roiling American politics for more than a decade. I think they can, and I think that a path like the one that Bernie Sanders and AOC have laid out is a key part of the strategy for how to get there. But I also think that if
even though they rejected him in the past.
So a good example for me, again, historian, always going to think historically. Ronald Reagan ran 3 times before running and winning for president in 1980. Ran in 68, ran in 76, came close in 76, but still not close enough. Just because victory wasn't instantly achieved, the fact that that guy has gotten more votes than any socialist in American history, that's a really impressive accomplishment. Now, again, I don't think he's going to be president. Don't think that an explicit socialist is going to be elected to run the United States anytime soon. But I agree with Briahna that
they said the same thing about a black man with Barack Obama.
But it absolutely could have happened with Bernie in 2016, I do believe. But I think that the tendency within D.C. is to look at this sort of discontented mass of Americans who have been deciding elections for more than 60 years now, who feel like the game is rigged. They have broadly progressive-ish views on economics, but more centrist, moderate views on social issues, and think, again, the economy is rigged, but Washington is broken. They don't like all the fighting that they see. I just don't think that someone like Alyssa Slotkin, much as I'm grateful that she won in Michigan, a tough race and a tough year, look at the response to her State of the Union rejoinder, right? It happened just a month ago. Does anyone here remember a single word of that thing? No. Are AOC and Bernie perfect messengers? I don't think so, but at least they get people to pay attention to the strongest issue Democrats have, which are those pocketbook populist concerns.
You wanted to come in there, Kate.
Well, I think we're going to have our first opportunity to put a check on Trump coming up in the House midterms. And what we have seen consistently is that the candidates that are able to flip red seats to blue, which is how we're going to take back the majority and put a check on the worst impulses of this administration, are the people who are able to run in that moderate lane. And I think that there's a real moment of opportunity here, because we have finally transitioned now from an era where we had the Clintons and the Obamas and the Bidens, and there is going to be, I think, a very wide field of candidates, many of whom could claim that outsider mantle. And I think it's a false choice to say I think it's a false choice to say that the only way to try and seize that anti-establishment or that anti-institutionalist strain that we see out there is to run a, Donald Trump of the left. I think what we can find is that there is a middle ground that has a fight to it.
Are you saying Bernie and AOC are too radical?
Which position? Which specific position is too radical? Because we have a Democratic Party that looks at polls that show that 88% of Democratic voters, 60-odd% of independent voters, and almost 50%, 49% of Republican voters want something like Medicare for all. And then they run a candidate like Joe Biden who says, even if it passed the House and the Senate and they were on my desk, I would veto it. Coincidence that he's someone who got more pharmaceutical money than anybody else in the field in 2020? No, I don't think so. That is why the Democratic Party has such a hard time positioning itself as the anti-oligarch party. Bernie and AOC can do it. They've never taken billionaire money. That's part of why so many of us were devoted to them and saw that they had a clear message precisely because they were unencumbered by those donors.
It sounds as if Kate is saying
we can seize the mantle of government with reform and do so in a way that actually delivers. I think part of the frustration that we are seeing from people is that they have not seen our policies be able to deliver progress that they've been looking for in a real way.
I mean, this is the problem.
Medicare for All was tried in a number of states, including Vermont, and it failed.
That is not true. First of all, the reality is that Medicare for All in a tiny state like Vermont doesn't work because you don't have the right, the base, the large enough people to support the program. You need healthy people to buy into the program, et cetera. But the reality of the situation is that every other similarly industrialized country in the world has this program. But in America, our Democratic Party spends more time trying to convince the public why it cannot be than actually advocating for it. You have Barack Obama running on a public option, and then we say, oh, we can't do it. These things just can't be passed. But you have what is described as this rotating villain theory, where there's always, even if you have a supermajority majority in the House, 1 or 2 or however many people you need to pull the emergency escape hatch and release the donors from an obligation of actually having to transfer the enormous amounts of wealth that have been shuttled to the top of this country over the last 30 to 50 years back down to the people who actually labor to work it. That's the problem.
All right, I'd love to stay on this, but we've got to get on to other issues, immigration. I'll just pick up with you, Briahna. Trump has campaigned on immigration and border security. In fact, we've seen an uptake, an escalation compared to his first term's policies. I mean, just recently, immigration agents deported 3 US-born children and their mothers. Trump has invoked a centuries-old piece of legislation that we've been speaking about here on UpFront, 1798 Alien Enemies Act, to arrest and deport people, hundreds of migrants being sent to a mega prison in El Salvador. And he's also arresting and threatening to deport permanent legal residents, students who have valid visas, although he walked back on some of them. But generally, there is that crackdown on students and anybody else who is supporting Palestine. Have we seen enough public outcry on this and political opposition?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think no. The answer is there hasn't been enough public outcry, although there has been significant pushback, obviously, from left and liberal media sources. And I think part of the reason is, while you'll find Democratic politicians who are willing to speak out in the abstract about what Trump is doing, and in specific cases that relate to various Latin American folks who've been deported, there is a sort of a hole of commentary around the student activists who have been targeted for their pro-Palestine speech, because so many, again, getting back to this money and politics issue and how it is really hamstringing the Democratic Party, they're unwilling to advocate for someone like Mahmoud Khalil's right to be critical of a genocide in Gaza, because it is a genocide that the Democratic Party has supported, that Joe Biden said he was not going to change his policy on, that Kamala Harris said she was not going to break policy from Biden on, and that could not have continued but for U.S. support. So you have someone like Cory Booker, potentially one of these 2028 candidates, who will filibuster for 24 hours, but not say a single word about the issue that polls suggest might have been determinative in the Democratic Party's loss last fall. And how can you be an advocate, a genuine advocate for free speech issues, when you're willing to look the other way, when it's the ADL forcing Ivy League schools and others to revise their campus policies, to have new anti-Semitism groups that are really just ferreting out any student who dares to object to an unprecedented number of kids being killed in a war, unprecedented number of child deaths of any war in recorded history. Mm-hmm. You simply do not have the credibility to make the arguments if you have a Gaza-shaped hole in your arguments.
I mean, 52,000, Katie, your thoughts here, 52,000 Palestinians have been killed. Aid has been blocked from entering Gaza in the last 2 months. And this situation, this issue was a huge electoral issue here in the United States. And Congress has basically been bipartisan in protecting Israel. The standing ovation that Benjamin Netanyahu enjoyed when he arrived here in the United States. And Trump has also added to this that he's going to take over Gaza and turn it into some sort of Riviera of the Middle East. Now, we've had the situation, the genocide starting under a Biden administration, and now we are in the Trump era. Is there a difference in the two administrations' policies and approach to the genocide? I mean, are we seeing a continuation of U.S. policy when it comes to Israel and Palestine, regardless of who is in the White House?
I mean, I think that there's nobody on the left who is happy about how the Trump administration is handling the Middle East. But I think this is where we have to work through the challenges of our democratic posture on immigration. We have lost ground with people who, frankly, a majority of foreign-born Americans who voted back Trump. And so I think there's an opportunity for Democrats to stand firm about the importance of free speech and the importance for due process. And at the same time, we have to be able to articulate an affirmative vision for what a coherent immigration policy is going to look like in this country. And I think that that needs to include a message that we hear the concerns that voters have, that there needs to be order at the border, and that we need to have legal, modern pathways so that people can come and work and participate in a global, modern economy in a way that, frankly, this Congress has been unwilling to address over something like 30 years.
Tim, I mean, are the Democrats underestimating the magnitude of the Israel and Palestine matter on electoral outcomes here? I mean, part of these crackdowns that we've seen on students, the deportation, have been, yes, about concerns around crime in the United States and members of gangs, but a lot of them have been around free speech on Palestine and Israel. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that for both a lot of ordinary voters out there, and even frankly for the Trump administration, as important as what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now could be abstractly, for the Trump administration, I think it's a pretextual excuse to crack down on campuses who they wouldn't like otherwise. And although you can find lots of evidence that Gaza was a factor on a lot of voters' minds, I think at least the most persuasive studies I've seen said that when voters went to the polls last fall, it was grocery prices at the top of the list, followed by immigration, where the border more than Gaza itself. Now, again, there are some people for whom it was very serious, and there are some polls you can point to out there that say otherwise. But I think the preponderance of evidence points in the other direction, which brings me to the question of what Democrats should do now. On the border, I think the clear case to make is that there is a majority out there of Americans who they don't like chaos at the border, but they also don't like chaos at home. And what Trump is doing, a lot of folks out there approve of the fact that entries into the country have plummeted in the last 100 days. But they don't like a lot of the details of what's going on with deportation. They don't like the violation of due process. They don't like Trump bringing that chaos inside the government. That is a strong case to make. When it comes to folks like Mahmoud Khalil in particular, I think that as sympathetic as I am to wanting to turn the conversation to Gaza itself, I think that pragmatically speaking, the best that we can do for someone like Khalil is to make a broad coalition that says we are defending free speech rights regardless of how you feel about Palestine, regardless of how you feel about Gaza. I like the fact that someone like David French can say, I think that, or Eli Light can say, I think these are Hamasniks, I hate what Khalil stands for, but he deserves to be in this country.
I mean, we even had a podcaster, Joe Rogan, who has been a staunch Trump supporter, also raising concerns about the lack of due process, calling it dangerous. So even as they support immigration control, border security, the way in which Trump is doing it, undermining the autonomy and the authority of the courts. So it is the execution, the method that is problematic. But Briahna, let's talk about this. Can we give some credit to some of the lawmakers that there's been some resistance in Congress? You mentioned Cory Booker's historic 25-hour speech. It doesn't seem like it impressed you at all. We saw Senator Chris Van Hollen visit the El Salvador prison and appeal to Trump to return a Maryland man who was deported, mistakenly deported. We've also, though, seen some congressional Democrats support some of the Republicans' decisions. For example, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer voting with Republicans on a spending bill, Democrats supporting some of Trump's appointments for cabinet. But I suspect you're going to say they're not doing enough to fight Trump, but there have been some efforts.
Certainly,
at pushing back.
I will credit Van Hollen's trip. I think that was an important moment. I will not credit Cory Booker's for some of the reasons that I mentioned before. I mean, Cory Booker had one of his New Jersey constituents arrested and deported and wouldn't say a peep about it. And it's precisely because he's one of the biggest recipients of AIPAC money in Congress. These things are inextricable. You cannot talk about one without talking about the other. And while I think that the pundits that you mentioned who have advocated for some of the people who were targeted, despite not agreeing with their viewpoints, that's all well and good. But that doesn't do anything when compared to an entire Congress, an entire bipartisan Congress that has, since the beginning of this genocide, consistently voted not to have a weapons embargo against Israel, not to respect the ICC's arrest warrants when Yoav Gallant or Netanyahu come to this country or travel through international waters, international airspace, but to sanction people like Redi Tlhabi for simply saying, stop a genocide, who are willing to entertain these Senate hearings where they, in a bipartisan way, criticize and lambast university presidents for not targeting anti-Semitism sufficiently when the anti-Semitism that is raised is students saying free Palestine, and who are turning a blind eye to Muslim students as they are targeted, harassed, and deported, including most recently this incident in New York where a Jewish Israeli woman who's pro-Palestine was beaten to a pulp by pro-Zionist protesters. And you don't see any Senate hearings, any congressional hearings on those kinds of things. The asymmetry is directly leading to policy outcomes that is continuing to divide the public and the public from Congress and undermine the credibility of Congress, so that when the odd person like Van Hollen does do the right thing, that person is not speaking as a body. They aren't speaking as a part of a party that the public can then have faith and believe in and want to go and vote for at the polls. And I say that believing that Democrats will probably be successful in midterms. But what are they going to do with that opportunity? Are they going to say this is evidence of the enthusiasm for a different kind of politics? Or are they going to say, good, we got a reprise. Let's use this opportunity to run Gavin Newsom. Let's run J.B. Pritzker. And we're going to end up right back in this cycle 4 years, 8 years after that. And God knows what kind of Trump is going to come after Trump.
Kate, I think this is a moment where, though, if we are able to take back the House, we need to prosecute the case on the economy. The headline this morning is that we are seeing the GDP shrinking for the first time. The Trump slump is
blamed
becoming
Biden
the
for
Trump
that.
recession.
He posted something on X explaining.
That's a cute tweet, I guess. But like the facts and the calendar is pretty obvious to anybody. You don't need a college degree to know that January is a long time ago. And as he's touting, 100 days of his administration, we have seen significant and very observable declines in the economy. That is a massive target that Democrats need to be going after. We are going to see prices rise. We are seeing executives warn that we are going to have empty shelves as cargo ships are being turned around internationally. That was not inevitable. You don't have to take it from me. The Wall Street Journal this morning noted that there was a strong and growing economy when the president took office. Inflation was going down. This is all a direct result of the Trump tariffs and the chaos that he has unleashed. And people are going to be seeing it and feeling it. And that is where Democrats have a huge opportunity to focus our attention.
Democrats have been criticized for not being able to articulate their vision, to articulate their policies clearly. Kamala Harris's campaign was criticized for lacking clear policy proposals and, mainly relying on being an alternative to Trump. Clearly, that is just not enough.
Yeah.
What should they do differently then this time?
Well, I think that there's going to need to be a robust conversation about an alternative to right-wing populism. Obviously, we see an approach coming from folks on the left that are offering the fight the oligarchs. I think that the right way is going to be something that is more in the mainstream.
I think it's going to be. Kate? Didn't we just try that?
Well, and I think what we saw, though, is that people were hungry. They saw Harris, for as much as it upsets me and probably you, they saw Harris as more extreme than Donald Trump. That was present in our own polls. That was present in other public opinion polls. And the top thing that the Harris campaign saw as their weakness was being perceived as dangerously liberal. That is something that the
Is this where disinformation comes in here? Because, how does the Democratic Party win another election unless it invests in some healthy information ecosystem? Some of the extreme rhetoric that came out of Trump's mouth, Trump's campaign about trans people, about black people, about immigrants, they're eating the dogs. How does a party counter that level of rhetoric?
Disinformation is real, but its target audience is really narrow, too. It really does come down to people who, the right-wing versions of the people watching this show, who are consuming a sort of consistent diet of right-wing infotainment. That's a problem. It's something that, at the very least, needs to be countered in the public sphere by folks like Briahna, who can take a message to them directly. But again, most voters are just not consistently enough dedicated to following politics for misinformation to reach them. The information that they care about is, oh my God, car insurance rates are out of control, interest rates are through the roof. There's a cost of living crisis, and no amount of misinformation can obscure that fact. Sorry, Briahna, go ahead. I was going to say, so what Democrats need to do, I think, going forward is, and this might be a place where there's some consensus, although I'll give up on that, broadly speaking, a big tent on the culture war and a strong economic populist message that shows that the party understands the real concerns that voters have. And I think, yes, being perceived as too liberal is a problem, although how we define liberal is open to debate. Yeah. But the other problem is just Democrats being the party of the establishment, in particular the party of Joe Biden. And I think one of the best things the party can do to reestablish credibility, have messengers out there who treat Joe Biden the way that Donald Trump treated George W. Bush. Acknowledge that this was a failed presidency, that running Joe Biden in 2024 was a scandal. And when there are politicians out there who are brave enough to say that explicitly, that will be a sign that the party gets how much they screwed up over the last 4 years.
Yeah, I agree, and that's not happening. I mean, we just had the correspondents' dinner a few days ago, and a journalist who was honored there, Alex Thompson, he has written a book and made a speech about the obligation that the press corps had to be more honest about what was going on with Joe Biden's health and cognition behind the scenes. And he got a lot of backlash for saying the obvious. I don't know anybody who I spoke to over the course of the last 2 years, 4 years. I mean, as someone who was working with the Bernie Sanders campaign back in 2020, I remember when his eye bled out during a town hall and nobody talked about it. I remember when Cory Booker and Julian Castro had the temerity to say the truth after one of the big debates that Joe Biden didn't seem to be able to remember the last thing he said on the debate stage, and they were disappeared from the Democratic Party until Cory Booker showed up doing his filibuster routine on the congressional floor. So I agree with that aspect of it, but I do want to disaggregate something that was said here about like liberalism and Kamala Harris being seen as too liberal. We need to be really clear what happened here. Democrats, I think, are all ready to pivot right on culture issues and say we lost because of trans people, let's throw them under the bus. I think we need to remember historically what happened. The Democratic Party increasingly leaned into so-called woke identity issues precisely because it had nothing to offer in the alternative. If you are a party that is controlled by the same substantive donor base as the Republican Party, you need to have an ability to distinguish yourself to the public in ways that don't include Medicare for all, a $15 minimum wage, all of these, strong unions, winning policies that people want, but the Democratic Party's donor base won't allow them to get behind. So what do? You focus on racism, things that are real, by the way, but you focus on identity issues, gender identity issues, sexual identity issues, and the like, which cost the Bank of America nothing. It cost J.P. Morgan nothing to put up a trans flag or a rainbow flag or what have you. And so the Democratic Party made this bet where they overly invested, and they said to the people, vote for me because you care about gay people. Now, I hope we all care about gay people. I hope we all care about black people. But when you then have these kitchen table issues that are emerging and real economic problems people are facing, that's where the resentment comes in, because you're telling me I have to pick my interest in these diverse groups over my own family and my life, including, by the way, families that are gay and black and Latino and all these other kinds of things that also have these economic hardships. And so when the pundits are trying to understand why are all of these first-generation immigrants or Latinos or whomever increasingly moving to the Trump category, to voting for Trump, that is why people are going to prioritize their economic needs, and the Democratic Party needs to figure out an economic policy plan that they can actually offer that doesn't look like them just throwing scraps while they, protect Nancy Pelosi's ability to insider trade.
Yeah, when voters say that they think that Harris was too liberal, they don't mean that she was supporting Medicare for all. They mean that it felt like she was going to force them to attend a white fragility book club.
Right.
That's a distinction that's worth paying attention to.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Tim, Kate, and Briahna, thank you very much for joining us on UpFront.
Thank you.
Thanks indeed. That's our show, folks. UpFront will be back next week. Thank you.